you curious about learning intervals? Let's dive in. Welcome back to Learn Piano, a personal practice. I'm Cynthia of Cynthia Ali Studios, a place where you can learn and find your joy in music. I'm so excited to continue this learning journey with you through Season 3. In our last episode, Season 3, Episode 1, we explored finger dexterity and fluidity. How to train your fingers to move independently and more smoothly. If you haven't checked out that episode yet, be sure to listen in. Today, we're diving into intervals. Intervals are essential for understanding how music is structured, and they play a huge role in everything from scales to chords to melodies and harmonies. You'll start hearing these in music when you play. And by understanding the feel of each interval, you'll be able to play more expressively. Before we start, a quick reminder, grab your free piano journal to guide you in your practice. You can download it at cynthiaalistudios.com/piano community, and I've linked it in the show notes. In this journal, you can keep track of the skills that you learn, and learning intervals is a great skill that you could record in your journal. An interval is simply the distance between two notes. Intervals are measured in semitones, which are half steps, or whole tones, which are whole steps. Each interval has its own unique sound and feeling, and today we'll explore how they sound and what they can add to your playing. Let's talk about each interval. I'll go through each one from the first all the way up to the 8th, and then I'll explain to you their emotional qualities, how you can recognize them, and then even music to help you remember what they sound like. So the first one is unison. It's a first. The two notes are played on the same pitch. On the piano, it would just sound like this. To explain it further, we could think of it as two singers, both singing a C. One singer would be singing a C, and the other one would be also singing a C, and at the same time, it would be unison, same note. The next interval is a second. You can recognize the sound of this interval by how dissonant it sounds, a bit clashy and tense. When you hear it in music, it can give you a sense of urgency, or the sound can be very jarring and unsettling. For example, I'm going to show you all of these intervals starting on a C, but you could start them anywhere on the keyboard, but to make it simple and easy for this lesson, I'm just starting on C. So it would be your middle C and your D. The notes are adjacent on your keyboard. When I learned intervals, the song that I was taught to help me recognize a second is the opening of Jaws. You'll never forget that interval if you remember the opening theme of Jaws. The interval of the third sounds like this. It's the C and it skips up to the E. The way that we know is because we're going to count 3 notes. 1, 2, 3, that's your third. The note you start with and the note you end with. You can do that for all of them and it will show you what is the kind of interval that it is. This one is so beautiful. It has a warm and a harmonious sound and is often used in melodies. It creates a pleasing and stable sound. So if you enjoy composing music, you could think about using a third if you want to start invoking that kind of emotion. Now the example of a third in a song is For He's a Jolly Good Fellow. For he's... So if you can remember that melody line, you will remember the third. Now going on to a fourth. This one sounds like it's suspended up in the air without resolution. It can be very strong and open. It always makes you want to come back into the third as a resolution, so you could start with the fourth and resolve into the third. Are you able to hear that tension resolving? I really enjoy that interval. It has a very unique sound and it's fun to put into music. This one, you can recognize it with the song Here Comes the Bride. Here comes. So if you sing that melody, you'll always remember what a fourth is. Here comes. Now we come to the interval of the fifth. The fifth goes from C to G. For this interval, you're going to be skipping the D, E, and F, so 3 notes in between. This interval is also known as the perfect fifth because it's very stable, has resolution, and it's very harmonious and pleasing to the ear. The song example for this one is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Twinkle, twinkle. So the first twinkle is on the C, and then the second twinkle is on the G, which gives you that fifth. Twinkle, twinkle. Moving along to the sixth. This one sounds like this. This one can be very sweet and lyrical in a piece. It has beauty and movement. It's much more expressive and flowing. Together, it sounds like this, which we call a harmonic interval when they're played at the same time. But I'd like to show you how it sounds as a melodic interval. That just means that you play one at a time. So we're playing the C to the A. Can you see how that, as a melodic interval, when it's one at a time, how it does sound very sweet and lyrical? I think that's really pretty. Okay, now we're going to the seventh interval. This one is much different than the sixth. All right, are you ready? That interval is known to be very dissonant and wild, often called the wild child. It is very dissonant and unsettling and doesn't quite sit comfortably with all the other intervals. It doesn't resolve easily and it creates a lot of tension. Some people even call it the interval that doesn't fit in because it seems a little rebellious. Do you agree with that? The song sample for this one is Somewhere from the West Side Story. There's a... So the words for that are there's a place for us, and so if you can remember that, you have the seventh. It doesn't sound quite as jarring when they're played separately in the melodic interval, but they sure do sound wild when they're played at the same time as a harmonic interval. Lastly, we come to the eighth. This is also known as an octave. This one we would start on a middle C and end on the treble C, and they're 8 notes apart. So you would have 6 notes in between. This one is known to feel like it comes to a complete resolution. Since it has a nice completeness in its sound and a resolution, it's often used at an end of a piece. So for example, you could be playing a piece. And then that octave at the end gives it a resolution. Now, for those of you who are intermediate learners and you want to push the intervals up a level, you can also focus on learning how to read them on the staff. Recognizing them on the staff can help you to read music more efficiently. It'll speed up your learning and you'll play more fluid soon. So let's break down how to recognize these intervals on the staff. Each one has its own unique look, and once you know what to look for, it's easy to identify them. Here is a quick run-through of what you want to look for. Just a reminder, intervals can either be stacked on top of each other, so played at the same time, like the third together is the harmonic interval, and also you can play them as a melodic interval one at a time. So you're going to have to learn to recognize them either stacked on top or side by side as they are seen in a melody line. All right, so for unison on the staff, they will be placed on the same line or space, exactly in the same spot. That one is pretty easy to identify. Now, when you want to recognize the second, then you are going to look for two notes. One is on the line and one is on a space, and they're right next to each other. It could go reverse order, line to space or space to line, depending upon which note it starts on. If you see them as the harmonic, which you play at the same time, you will see a stem with a double note head. Coming to the third, for the harmonic interval, they will be stacked on top of each other with no space in between. They will go from line to line, or it could be space to space. If you start on a C, like middle C, it'll go line to line, but if you start on a D, it will go space to space. So those will be the first three that will be pretty easy to identify. Now, moving up to the fourth, if you go from C to F, you go from a line note to a space note. And there's very little space in between, but there is a space. It'll be fun for you as you practice to try to take notice of this. Now let's look at the fifth. These would either start on a line, and they'd both be lines, or they would both be spaces. If you start on a C, C is on a line, and then G is on a line. If you would start on a D, it would go from space to space because the D is on a space and the A is on a space. That is just a beginning help for you to start looking at those, and then there's a little more space in the middle. Now we're going to go to the sixth. This one starts on a line and goes to a space. So if you see an interval that has a line and a space, or a space to line, that's a little bit confusing. It could just depending on which note you start on, but there's going to be one of each. And then this has a bigger space in between. And when you get to the major 7, these are going to go from a line to a line. Or it could be a space to space if you start on a space note. That one's pretty easy to recognize. Same line to line or space to space with a big space in between. And then finally we come to the octave, and that's going to be a line to a space with a big gap in between. For me, when I started recognizing what the intervals looked like, it really sped up my ability to sight read music and to understand what I was playing in a much quicker fashion. I certainly hope you'll take time to look at these and start memorizing how they look. There is a website called musictheory.net. If you go to musictheory.net/exercises/interval, there is a quiz in there where it'll bring up intervals, and then you can guess what they are. This will really help you in your music reading. Well, there you have it. Each of these intervals has its own distinct visual pattern on the staff. With a little practice, you'll be able to spot them quickly and easily when you're reading music. Before I wrap up, I've got some exciting things coming up. You can find all upcoming events on CynthiaAliStudios.com/piano community. On March 22nd, 2025, I'm hosting a For Elise workshop at 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time. Whether you're a beginner or an intermediate learner, this will be a great opportunity to explore some of Beethoven's life and how this piece fits into history. and also to learn how to play this iconic piece. Check my website out for more details. I'll also be offering a 4-week online group class starting March 4th, 2025 for beginners, using the Faber Method book to get you started on your piano journey. If you've always been curious about learning the piano, now is your time. We also have a piano studio book club. We'll be reading The Little Chronicle of Magdalena Bach starting February 15th, 2025. So join us to dive into the life of a musical legend, Bach. You can find on the website what we'll be reading the first month, and you still have time to get your book. Next week, we'll dive deeper into intervals and explore how they sound in actual pieces of music. We'll look at the different intervals and how they create moods and contribute to the overall emotional feeling of a song. It's a great way to connect with what you've learned with real-world music. Thank you for being a part of the Learn Piano community. Please subscribe to this podcast and to our newsletter. Keep practicing those intervals and don't forget to notice how each one sounds in the music you play. You're doing awesome. Until next time, keep practicing the piano and enjoying music.